Merritt's Mill Pond Cave Incident. On February 15, 2012, Ed Sorensen was watching student divers train at Merritt's Mill Pond in Florida. Ed was one of Florida's most experienced cave diving instructors and rescuers. He stood at the water's edge in street clothes, observing the underwater training session. Another instructor was teaching student divers in the underwater cave system. The students wore double air tanks mounted on their backs for the dive. These back-mounted tanks made the divers wider than their shoulders. Many cave divers prefer side-mounted tanks because they make you narrower in tight spaces. The training dive started normally with the instructor guiding students through underwater passages. As the group moved deeper into the cave, they came to a narrow restriction. A restriction is a tight passage where the cave walls close in significantly. When the students tried to pass through the narrow space, their tanks got stuck. The wide profile from their back-mounted tanks became wedged against the limestone walls. The students couldn't move forward and they couldn't move backward. They were completely trapped in the underwater cave passage. Panic took hold of the students as they realized they were stuck. Their rapid breathing caused air bubbles to escape quickly from their gear. The panicked movement stirred up sediment and dirt from the cave floor. The stirred-up sediment reduced visibility to zero in the water. In these conditions, divers can't see anything even with lights. The instructor tried to help the trapped students but couldn't find them in the murky water. Faced with students he couldn't locate, the instructor made the critical decision to surface. He broke through the water surface and immediately shouted for help. Ed Sorensen recognized the emergency right away despite being in street clothes. His years of cave rescue experience taught him that time was the most critical factor. Every minute that passed meant the trapped divers were using more air. Without hesitation, Ed began rapidly changing from street clothes into diving gear. Within just a few minutes, Ed had his equipment ready and entered the water. He descended into the cave system where visibility was still zero from the sediment. In these dark conditions, Ed had to rely on touch and his knowledge of the cave. For 15 minutes, Ed methodically searched the underwater passages for the students. He used systematic search techniques to cover areas where they might be trapped. Then, in the silent underwater world, Ed heard a sound that gave him hope. Following the sound through the dark water, Ed located one of the trapped students. Rescuing trapped cave divers requires careful work to avoid making things worse. Ed had to figure out how to free the student whose gear was wedged in the rocks. After successfully freeing the first student, Ed took him to a safe location. He calmed the student down and told him to wait in the safer area. Ed then returned to search for the second trapped student. Using the same systematic approach, he located the second student. Like his classmate, this student was trapped by equipment too wide for the passage. With both students located and freed, Ed faced the challenge of getting them to the surface. Managing two scared divers in zero visibility while navigating cave passages required exceptional skill. The students needed constant reassurance and guidance to exit safely. The ascent to the surface marked the successful end of a rescue that could have been deadly. Morrison Spring Cave Incident. On August 30th, 1986, several divers gathered at Morrison Spring in Florida for night diving training. Morrison Spring has an underwater cave system beneath its peaceful surface. Among the divers were Mike Clennon, age 36, who had rescue certification but no cave training. Brenda Buno, age 26, had just completed her basic open water certification that very day. At 7:15 in the evening, the group started their planned night dive training session. Each diver had one light and a special glow stick for backup lighting. The glow sticks had different colors to tell students apart from instructors. Night diving is much harder because the underwater world becomes dark and confusing. The training session went well and most divers were ready to surface. But 4 members of the group made a dangerous decision. Instead of ending their dive, they chose to explore the lower cave system. Mike and Brenda were among these 4 divers who went into the cave. This decision was the beginning of a series of deadly mistakes. The 4 divers went into the cave without setting up a safety guideline to the entrance. A guideline is a rope that leads back to safety and is required in cave diving. Each diver only had one light and one air tank, which is not enough for caves. Cave diving is much more dangerous than regular open water diving. In caves, you can't swim straight up to the surface if something goes wrong. The passages can be narrow, muddy, and very confusing in the dark. Without proper training and equipment, even experienced divers can die in caves. The lower cave at Morrison Spring goes deep into the limestone rock. Natural light disappears completely and the passages wind like a maze. Inside the cave, the 4 divers explored while their air supplies got lower. Swimming through the cave made them breathe faster and use more air. Soon, 2 of the divers realized their air tanks were getting dangerously low. They signaled to Mike and Brenda that they needed to leave the cave, but Mike and Brenda decided to stay in the cave longer. This showed dangerous overconfidence and poor understanding of the risks. The other 2 divers started swimming back to the surface without a guideline. In the darkness, finding the correct path to the the exit became very difficult. Their lights showed limestone walls, but nothing looked familiar. The psychological pressure of being lost underwater while air runs out is terrible. After several scary minutes, the two divers found the exit and surfaced safely. They reached the surface at about 8:40 in the evening. Back inside the cave, Mike and Brenda continued exploring. They didn't realize they were gambling their lives in the dangerous cave. Mike's rescue training was for open water, not underwater caves. Brenda had only basic diving skills from getting certified that same day. They had planned to turn back when their air reached 500 psi pressure, but proper cave diving requires much more conservative air management. As minutes passed, both divers used up their air supplies. Other divers above water became worried about their long absence. Just 5 to 10 minutes after the survivors surfaced, rescue divers went down. They searched the dark cave with their lights looking for signs of Mike and Brenda. The discovery came quickly, but it was too late to help. Brenda was found against the ceiling of the cave, motionless. Mike was found on the floor of the same chamber, also still. Both divers still wore their masks, but their breathing regulators had come loose. No lights were working, and the glow sticks were too dim to see anything. The complete darkness had made navigation impossible and caused panic. Rescue divers brought both bodies to the surface as quickly as possible. CPR was immediately given to both divers at the surface. They were rushed to a nearby hospital for emergency treatment, but the damage from being without oxygen underwater was already done. Both Mike Clennon and Brenda Buno were pronounced dead at the hospital. Hubbard Cave incident. Sherry Droe and John Hodar were going through a very bitter divorce. The 49-year-old woman and 54-year-old man had been fighting and arguing for months. Their families wondered if they would ever be able to be nice to each other again, but on Sunday, August 24th, 2003, something changed between them. Maybe they felt nostalgic for better times when they were happy together. They decided to go caving at Hubbard Cave in Glenwood Canyon like they used to do. They didn't tell anyone where they were going that day. Not Sherry's daughter, not John's friends. Not a single person knew their plans. It was an impulse decision that seemed harmless at the time. The cave entrance looked like a mouth in the mountainside. They had been to this cave before when they trusted each other. Now they stood at the entrance as strangers who just happened to share a history. What was supposed to be a quick look became something much more dangerous. They turned on their flashlights and stepped into the darkness. The first passage was narrow and they had to squeeze through sideways. Then they crawled through spaces barely wide enough for their shoulders. The cave system twisted and turned like a three-dimensional puzzle. Every direction looked the same as they moved deeper underground. Then disaster struck when they reached a junction where 3 tunnels met. Neither of them recognized this part of the cave system. The cave had become a maze and they were lost in its heart. John's flashlight beam showed identical rock formations everywhere. Nothing looked familiar as they backtracked and tried different routes. Every path led to more confusion and they couldn't find the way out. When their flashlights began to dim, panic set in quickly. They found a small alcove barely large enough for both of them. The cramped space forced them to sit pressed together. John's light flickered twice and then died completely. Sherry's flashlight lasted a few more minutes before it also went out. Complete darkness and crushing silence consumed them. The temperature in the cave was dropping and they had nothing with them. No food, no water, no extra clothes, just hope that someone would find them. But who would notice they were missing since they told no one? Monday passed in a blur of cold and hunger. They took turns sleeping and pressed together for warmth to fight hypothermia. Above ground, life continued normally and nobody worried about them yet. It wasn't until Tuesday evening that Sherry's daughter, Raya, became concerned. She tried calling her mother's house but got no answer. She called John's number, but it went straight to voicemail. By Tuesday evening, the fear became unbearable for the family. Raya called the sheriff's office to report her mother and John missing. Family members told police they were worried about John's anger from the divorce. They painted a picture of a man who might be capable of violence. This changed everything from a missing person case to a potential crime. Back in the cave, John realized one flashlight still had some battery left. He pulled out a hammer and chisel he had been carrying. John used these tools to carve directional markers into the cave walls. He marked areas where they had been in case they needed to navigate out. Wednesday brought helicopters searching the area, but they found nothing. Thursday morning, a family friend who was a pilot spotted their car. Their Suburban was parked at the trailhead near Hubbard Cave. Deputies treated the area as a crime scene instead of starting a rescue. They put up yellow tape and looked for evidence of a struggle. When family offered to search the cave, deputies refused, citing safety concerns. Friday morning, officials finally allowed family members to enter the cave. Raya and her brother grabbed flashlights and searched for their mother. They followed the fresh markings John had carved into the stone walls. The markings led them directly to where Sherry and John were waiting. Within minutes, they found the pair weak but alive in their cramped shelter. Both were dehydrated and weak but in good condition after 4.5 days. They had survived without food or water in the freezing cold cave. John's hammer and chisel had been used to help them survive, not hurt anyone. The man suspected of violence had actually been trying to save Sherry. Family members were angry that police had delayed the rescue by treating it as a crime. Despite their bitter divorce, the couple had worked together to stay alive. Sweet Potato Cave incident. In Kentucky, a group of scouts gathered for a caving expedition at Sweet Potato Cave. Among the scouts was 14-year-old Jesse Gott. The scouts were equipped with helmets, tents, and headlamps. Together, the group made their way into the cave. All seemed well until the group came across a narrow crevice. The crevice looked interesting to Jesse. It looked like a tight squeeze, but he was determined to explore it. Ignoring the cautious warnings, Jesse slipped into the crevice. He hoped to find something extraordinary on the other side. However, the thrill quickly turned to dread when he realized he was stuck. Jesse was wedged tight up to his chest with no way to move his body out. Jesse had never been in a situation where his body wouldn't do what he wanted. Andrew Duncan, one of the scout leaders, quickly looked at the situation. The scouts were now stunned into silence. One by one, they gathered around Jesse, saying words of encouragement. With each minute that passed, the situation became harder to ignore. His chest felt tight, not just from the physical pressure, but from fear. His fingers, numb from the cold, twitched without his control. Every second felt like a struggle. His body temperature was dropping. He was getting hypothermia. This made things worse. While Andrew and 2 other scouts stayed with Jesse, one scout ran back to the cave entrance to get help. The call for help reached the local firefighters and rescue squad. They arrived at the scene with specialized tools and determination to free the young scout. They knew they had to act quickly. Every minute mattered. Once inside the cave, the rescuers approached the narrow crevice where Jesse was trapped. They realized that Jesse needed treatment for his injuries and also for hypothermia. Immediately, they wrapped blankets and heating pads around him. Using shovels and crowbars, they began to make the opening bigger. After hours of hard work, the rescuers finally made progress. The opening was widened enough for Jesse to be pulled free. With everyone working together, they moved him out of the crack around 3 p.m. Jesse was finally free. Once out, he was taken to a local hospital for evaluation. The medical team quickly checked his condition. Thankfully, Jesse's ordeal had only resulted in mild hypothermia. Silent Descent Cave Incident. On September 30th, 2016, Luke Nelson was excited about exploring a cave in the Texas wilderness. Luke had explored countless caves before and wasn't afraid of risky adventures. The cave was known by locals as Silent Descent. It was a complex system of tunnels, many of which had never been fully mapped. One area had gained a reputation for being dangerous, an unmapped section called the Deadman's Tunnel. Luke knew about this section, but curiosity got the best of him. He packed his gear, checked his map, and told his sister he was heading out for a quick cave dive. What he didn't tell her was that he planned to go alone. Earlier that morning, Luke had called his friend, hoping to convince him to join. His friend had other plans and warned Luke about the dangers of caving alone, but Luke brushed off the concern. The entrance to the cave was about a 2-hour hike from the nearest road. Luke had walked the path before. As he neared the cave's mouth, he took a deep breath and entered. After hours of navigating through narrow passages and slippery rock formations, Luke reached a junction that wasn't on his map. A new, unexplored route branched off to the left while the main path went to the right. He hesitated, but the desire to explore the unknown was too strong. He went left, convinced that this new route might hold the thrill he was after. The passage was tight, much narrower than he expected. As he squeezed through, the walls began to close in around him. The ceiling lowered, forcing him to crouch, and soon he was crawling on his stomach. Several feet in, Luke realized his mistake. He tried to back up, but the walls pressed against his body, locking him in place. His chest felt tight as he realized he was stuck. He had taken the wrong route, a path too narrow for a full-grown man. Panic surged through him as he tried to free himself, but the rock seemed to tighten its grip. The narrow passage left him little room to expand his chest fully. The air felt stale and suffocating. Fear gripped him. He shouted for help, though he knew he was alone. There was no one to hear him, no one to rescue him. Hours later, when Luke hadn't returned, his sister began to worry. She called Luke's friend, who was immediately alarmed when he learned that Luke had gone into the cave alone. He alerted local authorities, and soon a rescue team was mobilized. When the rescuers arrived, they could see signs that someone had recently entered the cave. Hours passed with no sign of Luke. Then a rescuer spotted something. A small carabiner, likely dropped by Luke, lay near the entrance to the unmapped section. It was clear Luke had gone off the planned route and taken the dangerous path. The rescue crew knew that exploring this uncharted area was risky, but it was their only chance of finding Luke. One of the rescuers, small enough to fit through the tight passage, volunteered to go in. With a rope securely tied around him, the team carefully lowered him into the narrow tunnel. The passage twisted and turned, tightening in places. Then, in the dim light, he saw Luke, wedged deep in the passage but alive. His helmet had been knocked off and his arms were pinned awkwardly beneath him. Luke was overjoyed when he heard the rescuer. Although exhausted, this gave him the will to fight more. The rescuers signaled to the team and they got into action. First, they used a portable stove to produce heat to keep Luke warm. The plan was to widen the gap, set up a pulley system, and pull him out with extreme care. They spent hours chiseling away rock, careful not to cause a collapse. Once the gap was wide enough, they set up a pulley system. A rescuer was lowered in and secured a rope around Luke's body. Slowly, the team worked together, pulling him through the tight space. After a tense and exhausting effort, they finally brought Luke broke out. Deadman's Cave incident. On April 30th, 2007, Thomas Summers and his friend Brent Holbrook went to Deadman's Cave in Texas. Recent rains had raised the water levels in Deadman's Cave, blocking access to areas where cavers often explored. Their goal was to find and clear any blockages that might be stopping the cave's water flow. By 2 p.m., the two men had gone about 300 feet into the cave. The passage got narrower and the ceiling got lower to just a few inches of airspace. They had no helmets to protect them. Thomas was determined to keep going and swam ahead. Brent hesitated, realizing the risk was too high to continue. As Thomas swam further into Deadman's Cave, the passage grew tighter. The ceiling dropped, leaving just a few inches of airspace between the cold water and the rough stone above. The water was slowly rising from the recent rains. The air pocket he relied on grew dangerously narrow. Thomas kept his head as close to the surface as possible, desperately trying to find the few inches of air left. At first, he breathed carefully, keeping his face above the waterline. But as he moved deeper, the air began to feel stale and thick. The cave's atmosphere was already low on a fresh oxygen. It started to fill with carbon dioxide from his own breathing. Each breath he took brought in less oxygen and more of the suffocating gas. His chest grew tighter, his breath shorter, and panic began to take over. He realized that the air pocket wasn't getting fresh air fast enough. Thomas felt lightheaded and dizzy, as if the cave was spinning around him. The stale, oxygen-starved air filled his lungs, but it wasn't enough. Disoriented and gasping, Thomas's energy drained as the water reached his chin. His body gave out before he could make it back. In the dark, cold waters of Deadman's Cave, he slipped beneath the surface. He was unable to fight the pull of the water any longer. Brent swam a few feet behind Thomas, his heart pounding as the passage grew tighter. He called out, but only heard the sputtering of Thomas's breath echoing through the cave. Then there was only silence, no response, no movement. Panic surged as Brent shouted again, but the cave swallowed his voice. Realizing something had gone terribly wrong, Brent knew he had to turn back for help. Within hours, a rescue team arrived. The rescue crews worked tirelessly to lower the water level using powerful pumps. They hoped to clear the flooded passage before it was too late. Hours passed. The rescue teams knew they were in a race against time. By nightfall, the water levels had dropped just enough for cave divers to enter the flooded tunnel. Jean Kreka and Linda Pollitt carefully navigated the narrow, suffocating passage. Even a slight mistake could prove fatal for them. They had to rely on their training and instincts as they searched the dark waters for any sign of Thomas. After hours of careful work, John and Linda finally found his body. He was submerged in the tight air pocket where he had struggled. By 9 p.m., the rescuers emerged from the cave carrying Thomas's lifeless body.